Hello, this is Tiffany Adams, and this is my recap of day 3 of the R. Kelly trial. There was a cliffhanger at the end of the day, but whatever you're thinking it was, that wasn't it. All right, so the first witness today was a man named Mr. Navarro. He used to be R. Kelly's assistant, or one of his assistants at the chocolate factory. He went to a school in LA for music or something like that, and ended up getting an internship with the chocolate factory, which was in the basement floor of R. Kelly's home. After about 2 to 3 weeks, he moved up to a paid position, basically like a general assistant type of thing. He ran errands, he picked up guests, he went and got food, he ran errands, the full gamut. So he worked for R. Kelly for about 2.5 years. He started in July of 2007 and he quit in 2009. I think one issue was that there was some issues with his overtime pay, and once he left, he ended up suing them for his overtime pay, and he got paid. So either way, once he moved up to a paid position, he signed a W-2. He did a W-2, signed a non-disclosure, all pretty standard. He talked about several people who were like in around a lot, which was Daryl McDavid. There's been testimony about him being R. Kelly's accountant, and some testimony about him being one of R. Kelly's office managers. There was also a guy named Junebug, another guy named Donnie Lau, and a few other people. So he did say that when he picked up guests, which were primarily girls, he could not speak to them. They could not speak. Even when he took them around the house to their room or wherever it was, they could not engage in conversation. He did say he remembered a situation where he was watching the security footage for the chocolate factory, and 2 girls who looked fairly young jumped over the fence, and they could see them running through the yard, but they ended up going off camera. And that kind of ties back to yesterday's testimony from Jerronda Pace about her and her friend running through the gate. Now, she said that a car came through the gate and they just ran in from, after the car came in. But he said on the video, they jumped the fence. Either way, that's that. So he said that at the security gate at R. Kelly's home, security would check people's IDs, and then when people came to the studio, they would check IDs too. And at some point, they were supposed to scan IDs or make copies, but that was not always done. Nicole, who is one of R. Kelly's defense attorneys, she did establish that people could come and go when they wanted. She also established that on the rooms in the house, there were no special locks where people could be locked in the room. There were just standard locks. He said that one of his duties was cleaning at the studio, running errands, all that type of stuff. In one report, he stated that he was cleaning the studio or the chocolate factory and then some of the rooms, and he said there was a smell that was so bad, like he could never forget it. But on cross, Nicole established that he never saw buckets of urine or buckets of feces, which kind of goes back to some of the statements that the girls made, that they were not able to use the bathroom, but he said he never saw that. He also did, and this came out, talked about being on tour once and him driving with a girl from Alabama to Atlanta. And so that basically goes to one of the Mann Act charges, taking a minor over state lines, but he didn't know who the young lady was. Let's see. He couldn't recall if all the bedrooms had bathrooms attached, because that was something that came up yesterday when Jerronda Pace testified that she had to get permission to use the bathroom, even though there was a bathroom attached to her bedroom. Let's see what else. He also there was also some conflicting testimony. He said he never saw any physical abuse by anyone. Then he did say he heard some verbal abuse to employees, but on cross, it was brought out through a report where he said he never heard any physical abuse or saw he never heard any verbal abuse or saw any physical abuse. His comeback was, well, that time when he gave that statement to the federal agents, he had corona, or he thought he had corona. He was really sick. I don't know what corona has to do with you knowing or remembering certain things, but hey, who knows? He eventually he eventually stopped working for R. Kelly. He worked there about 2.5 years. They asked, was his job strange? Like, how did he feel about his duties? He said that he felt like his job was strange. He felt like he was kind of like in the twilight zone. And they asked, well, had he worked for other celebrities? And at that time, he'd never worked for any celebrities. But after that, he's worked with Kanye, Jay-Z, and some other celebrities. So he's like, okay, well, compared to what I did for them, yeah, it was weird. But it came out that what he did for them was totally different than what his position was for R. Kelly. He also talked about there's apparently something's going to come up with a black Range Rover. So he did talk about him driving Rob's cars to go pick up people, run errands, and just kind of went through the list of cars that were available to him. But this black Range Rover, which will come up, I don't know when, he said he never saw a black Range Rover and he never drove one. So I don't know where that's going, but it seems like it was important. He also, they also talked about the phones, him answering the phone in the studio, and R. Kelly's lawyer asked, well, you never got a call from any of the girls or any of the guests saying that they couldn't leave. And he was like, well, I kind of got a call, something like that. He said that he would get calls from the girls saying they wanted to leave, but they couldn't get a ride, or they didn't like have money to leave, something small like that. But nothing like where like they were being held against their will. He also said that he never saw any underage girls there. He thought that all the girls that he saw there were around his age, which was about 21 to 22 at that time. He did say that he got fined once. I guess like sometimes when employees did something wrong, they would get fined, which would be like a deduction from their pay. He didn't recall what the fines were or not. He just felt like, you know, he got a fine once and he felt like it wasn't deserved. He ended up leaving, and he sued R. Kelly, or Base Productions, so that's who he said was on his paycheck, because they didn't pay him for some overtime that he done. The next witness was Courtney Wilson. She was a associate at the law firm that did Jerronda Pace's first settlement. So she didn't have really a lot to offer. She just talked about how Miss Pace called on January the 27th of 2010 and she did the intake call about what the issue was, what she wanted to do. And she came in, talked about what happened. That was pretty much it. I think it's interesting that yesterday it was established that January 23rd was the last day that Ms. Pace and Mr. Kelly had any communications. And then shortly, 4 days later, she's contacting a lawyer. Also, during that time, they talked about this journal. The journal, again, where she wrote her notes about what happened on the 23rd, it was established that she did not create the journal entry on the 23rd. She only created the journal after she went to the lawyers. So that may come back up later. Other than that, the next witness was Carolyn Harris, the Cooke County Clerk. She was the supervisor over the marriage records and some other things. Let's just get to it. So there were 3 parts to the marriage certificate process, or marriage process. So the first is the marriage application. And she testified that in the marriage application, people come in, give their information from their identification card. And then the clerk takes that information, they print the marriage license right then, that day. you can get married the next day and it'll be valid. You can't get married the same day that you get the marriage license because it will be invalid. The only way that you can get married the same day you get the marriage license is if you are in the military. So after you get the marriage license, then you go to your priest or wherever it is you go and get married, and then you turn the marriage license back in and get a certification of marriage. So those are the 3 documents that you have in Chicago. You have the application, you have the license, and you get those 2 the same day, and then you have the certification of marriage. They talked about the details. Mr. Kelly's information was there, the message, the materials that were there for Aaliyah, what it said for her age. That was pretty much it. R. Kelly's lawyer, who was Nicole on cross, she was talking about there's a number on the bottom of the marriage certificate, and she was trying to bring that up and saying, she was like, well, what is this? Because there's several different numbers on the certificates, and she was trying to bring it up from what I thought was like there was some type of inconsistency or error in the certificate with this number that was on the bottom, and the clerk basically said that number was irrelevant. That number, I think it was like 699840. That number is the page count of the pages that were in the printer. So say for instance, if you were printing something and you had 500 sheets in the printer, and your printer did the same thing and you printed something and it was 292 at the bottom, then that means that was the 292nd page. It had no significance. They did talk about the signatures, and they didn't go into detail about it. This is something the prosecutor brought up and just saying, okay, this is where it says Robert Sylvester Kelly, and it was a signature, and then it was Aaliyah's name and it was a signature. So when I said that in my post that R. Kelly's attorney dropped the ball, was because so many more questions could have been asked about his signature, because we already know that he can't read or write. So it's almost like, well, how did he sign this? And there were other issues that came up later with the marriage. So I felt like that was a really good way to introduce issues regarding the marriage certificate, and they just didn't take the opportunity. Also, a lot of other things that came up were when the other attorney from the law firm that sued R. Kelly on behalf of Jerronda Pace, when the other attorney, there was another attorney, he was a white male for R. Kelly, he was asking questions about the settlement, well, the intake document that she had provided, or she had typed up the memo. So with that male attorney and with the female attorney, the judge kept having to, I don't want to say admonish them, but the prosecutor was objecting, the judge was sustaining the objections, meaning that the judge agreed with the objection, and a lot of times the objection was due to form, which is the way that you're asking the question or that you are presenting the question. And that happened a lot throughout the day, a lot. The people sitting next to me were like, those 2 lawyers need to go back to school. I have nothing else to say about that. All right, the next witness was the witness that we were waiting on, who was going to plead the 5th. It was Demetrius Smith. He did not want to testify. He planned on pleading the 5th before they brought the jury in for him. He ended up, the judge had to tell him, I know you plan on pleading the 5th. He had his attorney there. Great. So what ended up happening is the federal prosecutors had an order granting him immunity from prosecution based on things he testified about. And in that situation, in the federal system, it's kind of forcing your hand to testify unless you say, you know what, I'm just going to jail today. And that's what happened. So he gets on the stand. He didn't want to testify. And it was a show, to say the least. He talked about how he met R. Kelly in 1984. He had a band, and he met R. Kelly. He was in a talent show, and even back then, R. Kelly was writing his own songs, and he wanted some songs from R. Kelly. So they talked about, I think, Jerron Pace, her, just a little bit, because they wanted to talk about that, but they didn't really go into that detail. They also talked about, we had a recess in court, and that's when they talked about the t-shirt with Jerron Pace and whether or not there are going to be any type of evidentiary issues about it with the chain of custody, meaning, okay, did this cop give it to this cop, and did they document it appropriately? The judge was like, look, that's not a issue for me to not admit the evidence, but it's an issue of like the chain of custody. Not a big deal. Also on that recess, they talked about Rosh Hashanah and whether or not they're going to break for 1 or 2 days in September for Rosh Hashanah, or what they need to do. Apparently that's on Labor Day weekend, and if the jury wants to break 1 or 2 days, but R. Kelly's attorney Nicole says she wanted to be off for both days of Rosh Hashanah. All right, so Demetrius get back on the stand, and long story short, he is 65 years old. He did testify before the grand jury, and the grand jury is basically an anonymous group of people who decide, who hear some evidence or some limited testimony to determine whether or not the case is going to move forward. So he testified before the grand jury, but didn't want to testify in court today. There was a video that one of the R. Kelly supporters showed me where he was coming in earlier today. He was like, I'm Team R. Kelly. I'm here, to help R. Kelly. Other than that, when we were waiting for the jury to come in, we just, everyone in the courtroom silent. We're in the overflow room. He gets on the mic and says, how everybody doing? And the judge was just like, we're just gonna wait. Anywho, so once he began, he ended up becoming something like his manager, assistant, and R. Kelly paid him 5% of whatever he made. There was also another guy involved named Tyree Jameson, who was part of R. Kelly's security. He said that in 1988 or 1989, R. Kelly signed with Jive Records, and his manager was Barry Hankerson. And once he got signed with Jive, he started doing more things, like as far as scheduling for R. Kelly, and even when he started having tours, he would schedule the tours. So he was kind of like a semi-tour manager and personal assistant. He said that someone named Javante would travel with them when they were on tour. They all ended up meeting Aaliyah through her uncle, who was R. Kelly's manager, because her uncle felt like she had talent, so they wanted R. Kelly to meet her to see like what he thought about her talent. They met at Aaliyah's home in Detroit, and he said that walking into their home was like walking into like the home of the Cosbys. There wasn't too much else there. He said that she was a little nervous, she was shy, and Rob was shy, but Rob ended up playing the piano for her, and then she started to sing. But that wasn't the only reason they were in Detroit, because R. Kelly worked with a number, sorry guys, of other people, of other musicians in Detroit, so they met with them as well. Let me just be clear, I'm not going to give you guys a bunch of like details about the Aaliyah thing. I think that's distasteful and tacky. It's just not going to happen. But either way, he was a very reluctant witness. He made it clear on numerous occasions he didn't want to testify. He was saying, he didn't remember, and the prosecutor had his testimony from the grand jury, and she was like, well, do you need me to provide you with this to refresh your memory? And she had to constantly show him things. He was like, I don't remember, maybe, he was like, you tell me what I said. So that was that. And he talked about R. Kelly did write these songs on her first album, and that's pretty much it. They went on tour. Mr. Smith and R. Kelly and the rest of the team, they went on tour. Something happened. Long story short, they had to come back to Chicago, and that's when the marriage happened. So, long story short, he said that he didn't want R. Kelly to marry Aaliyah. That was Daryl's idea, who was R. Kelly's manager. He objected to it, but he still wanted to be in the loop because he wanted to like have his hand on R. Kelly because he didn't want this thing to spin out of control, that type of thing. So when they were having the conversation, he said that he knew where he could get an ID made. He told Daryl that, hey, somebody, people always need money. So Demetrius had received state benefits at some point, and so he had an idea to go and get a welfare ID for Aaliyah, or what they would call like a public assistance ID. I think that's what they called it. The public assistance card had no date of birth, none of that on there. He went into the office, like talked around to some people, offered somebody some money. They took it. He said they brought her in. They took a picture, gave her ID, and they left, and that was it. But they knew, because there was no date of birth or anything else on there, that they would need a second form of ID. So another guy that they knew had an idea to get her like a workplace like badge ID, and that guy knew some guy at some type of carrier company like FedEx or something like that, and they went there and got a workplace ID made. From there, they went to the Cooke County Clerk to get the marriage certificate, and that Daryl, who was R. Kelly's manager, handled that because they knew they didn't have proper identification for Aaliyah, because they only had the public aid ID and the workplace ID. So they would not give them a certificate. What happened is Daryl, the manager, did something that he didn't know, and they ended up giving them a marriage certificate. He also talked about, at that point, he was like, I don't feel comfortable. I don't like this. I don't want to talk about this. Aaliyah's parents aren't here. She's dead, so on and so forth. And the judge was like, you have to. And that was pretty much it. He also made some jokes throughout testimony, and the judge was like, my patience is wearing thin. And he was like, oh, so that means I can go? And she was like, no, that's not what that means. The case ended today with pretty much with that. The government asked him some more questions. We did not get to cross-examination of this witness, but the government did ask him some more questions today, just about his testimony at the grand jury, because he was reluctant to provide any information. And they were saying, well, you understand your immunity order and so on and so forth. And he was like, I feel like y'all threatening me at this point. I just want to go home. I want to stop this. And the judge was like, no. So at this point, it was 5:30. We had to leave. They recessed for the weekend, and the judge let Mr. Smith know he had to be back on Monday at 9:30. And he was like, he didn't want to. Hey, too bad. We adjourned for the day. As we were leaving the courtroom, we were notified that we could not leave because there was an incident in the lobby. We don't know what the incident was, but we had to all stay in the courtroom for about another 10 minutes and with a lot of security. And that was today at the R. Kelly trial.